It is a beautiful book about planting, about fostering, about raising things up, about what love is and what love demands, the process of growing things that are necessary for survival that may not appear flowery. I'm trying to use some horticultural phrases in my review. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. We're here today with another review. Today we are discussing The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson. It is a novel about indigenous practices, indigenous culture, indigenous life, and how Native American way of life was impacted by the rest of American history. So it is a novel, and I'm reading this one, or I just read this one, because it was a selection for the Book Naturalist Book Club, which is hosted by Doris from Aldi Books and Heidi from My Reading Life. But it's also Native American Heritage Month, and Indigathon is happening, and I wanted to read more books about Indigenous life. So this is a book that you should read right now, but also a book that you should read anytime you get to it, hopefully as soon as possible, because the message in this book is one that should speak to you if you are in any way concerned about climate change, and not just as it relates to whether the days are colder or hotter, but also about how some of our practices, our human practices, have been impacting our earth, and whether some of these practices are sustainable, and how much longer we can keep living like this before we are forced to change some of our habits. If any of that interests you, then you should read this book. So it is a novel, and it is about a middle-aged woman named Rosalie. And I say middle-aged because she's about 40s. She's recently widowed, and she's Indian. She is native, but she grew up away from her family. And so in her 40s, her husband, who's slightly older than she is, dies. And she goes back to her father's house, the house that her grandparents built, looking for connection with her people, with her land, with her history. And the book is told in some flashbacks, both Rosalie's as well as other women in her family. And we don't necessarily know the connections between all the characters and all their flashbacks, how they all relate to the main story, until pretty late in the novel. But all the perspectives, all the narratives are really interesting in their own right. And so as we're reading about these women and about the lives that they forge for themselves away from their homes, for all of them, for different reasons, because at different points in history, Native people have been taken away from their homes, taken away from their land. As we are reading about these characters, these women, we are exposed to some of the things that happen in their history, but we also see the impact that it has on them and their families as individuals trying to navigate the hurt and the pain of having to leave home for whatever reason, and how you try to make do. So rippling beneath the narrative in all of the different characters' lives is a story about seeds, and what seeds do, how the hard husk or the hard kernel of seeds is there to protect the delicate potential that's inside. And so we think about that in terms of physical seeds, but we also think about that in the tough exterior that some of these Native people have had to adopt in trying to learn how to live in these harsh circumstances that they found themselves in, and not completely just give themselves over to that pain. So Seed Keepers is about seeds. It's about preserving indigenous seeds and what that might mean for an individual who is trying to preserve seeds to keep herself and her family sustained for food this year, this winter, but also to ensure that they have seeds to plant and continue for the next year and the next generations. But it's also about these people, these Indians, these Native people who are taken away from their homes, one, because of removal, because there was mass removal of natives being taken away from their land and sent elsewhere, sent to reservations, so that the land, which was fertile and people, the government and individuals, other individuals wanted it. So the land was attractive for that reason, and so the natives were taken away from their homeland. So there's that reason. But also later, when native children were being taken away from their families and sent to boarding schools, or if there were people who were still living at certain points just on their own land, and something happened in the family, then these native children were taken and sent into foster care to families that were not native and were not going to respect or uphold the traditions that these children should have been being taught, just to preserve their way of life. So all these people have been taken from their land for different reasons, and having to form these personas, create these hard personas, so that they didn't just stay vulnerable and collapse under the weight of everything that was happening to them, because in a lot of cases there was suffering in lots of different ways. And so it is about exploring some of the things, some of the atrocities that happened to these people, but also how they built up these tough personas to try to deal with it, and what happens when you try to replant this seed. What happens when you put this seed, this person, back into fertile ground, when you put them back into surroundings, into relationships where, or into places where there's potential for relationships. So it's very interesting, because while we are thinking and talking about the seeds eventually being planted and new life bursting forth, we're also exploring the evolution of a relationship. Our character Rosalie, when she is younger and she meets the man she's going to marry, and the relationship that grows, how they have a son, and what that relationship, what that marriage, what that life is like for someone who is a person of native background in relationship with someone who is different. So the native people being talked about here are the Dakota people. And I don't know too much about their history, so I won't try to expound on any more of the history, but I'm going to encourage you to read this novel and then to start doing a little bit more research into the history of the Dakota people and what has happened to them over the decades, the centuries, since the Indians were taken from their land, and what has happened since then. All the different atrocities that I've mentioned here briefly, but will probably never encapsulate, even really go beyond the surface of what has happened to these people. So yeah, this is a brilliant novel. There are some places in the middle where there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion in this book, but not necessarily in the relationship between the people, because like I said, these are tough people to get to know. And even in the writing, like, it's not that the writing is stilted or awkward, it's just that the author is describing people who are not necessarily opening up themselves. They're not necessarily vulnerable to the other people around them, except when they're forced to be. And so it's a little difficult to read and put yourself in the place of characters who are not opening up to the people around them. So you know what's happening on the inside. You think you understand the difficulty that it is to be these people, but you also see how difficult it would be to know these people. So there's a lot about this book to really spend quiet moments absorbing. And so I'm going to recommend this book highly. It's not a perfect novel. Most novels aren't. But this is a really interesting story to delve into, because it explores the relationship that we have with seeds, that we need to have with seeds. You know, even for those of us who are living in metropolitan areas, maybe places where you don't have the one-on-one relationship with gardening and farming the way our ancestors did, it's still enough. It's still a caution for us to think about what's being done on our behalf. So when we purchase crops, when we purchase food that has been produced through genetic engineering, and we are supporting technology with our dollars that we need to question whether or not we believe in, whether or not we want to support. So there's a storyline in this book that talks a little bit about the seed industry and the patents that have been developed by companies like Monsanto and Dow that are not named in this book in that way because this is novel and it's fictionalized, but it should make you think, it should make you ponder some of the decisions that you are making and that you're endorsing by your habits. And so I love this book. Quiet, it is thought-provoking. It is a beautiful book about planting, about fostering, about raising things up, about what love is and what love demands. The process of growing things that are necessary for survival that may not appear flowery. I'm trying to use some horticultural phrases in my review. So yeah, it's about growing food for survival, not necessarily for amusement. And so we read that in terms of the plants, but we also read that in terms of the relationships with the people. It is a really thought-provoking book about nature and about our relationship to nature. And so there are discussions about native practices, and it's wonderful. So I'm going to highly recommend it. The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson. It is a novel, so there are fictionalized accounts, but it's overlaid on real events, real history, real people. And she tries to be respectful of names of other people. She says she uses some of her ancestors' names so that she doesn't infringe on other people's names, which I think is really interesting. So there's a lot about this book to really appreciate. Just want to highly recommend it. Go check out The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson. I'm sure you'll be hearing other people review this book in the upcoming days because I'm sure other people are reading it for the Book Naturalist Book Club as well. So I really enjoyed The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson, and I hope you will too. I read a free copy from New York Public Library, but I'm going to be purchasing my own print copy because I want to own it and talk about it later again. So I hope you'll pick up this book if you haven't already. If you haven't heard about this book and something I said in this video makes you want to pick it up, let me know about that in the comments. Or if you've read the book and you want to discuss something in the novel that maybe I didn't touch on, because there's a lot about the book that I didn't mention. Didn't want to spoil it for you. Let's chat in the comments down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let's chat in the comments. We'll be back soon for another video, another book discussion, another book review. And I hope you join me for that. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.